everyone. How are you doing today? I have Brian here, as I think many of you, or most of you already know, is Brian from Blitstitch. I said that right? Blitz.
That's right.
Yeah, Blitstitch. So you can find him on YouTube and Instagram, and I'll have, of course, everything linked below. Hi, Brian.
Hey.
How's it going today?
Going great. It's a nice morning here in Phoenix, and we're just dealing with the heat right now.
I know. Well, I'm glad you are, because we finally had the break in the weather, and it's nice and cool and breezy here. So I have the windows open. Hopefully it's not too distracting. So I finally am able to get another guy on the channel to talk about some cross stitch and knitting and some other things. So that is very exciting for me. I'm looking forward to our conversation here and to get some different perspectives, maybe, hopefully.
Right.
So, okay, so let's get started with, how did you get into, well, let's start with cross stitch, because I know you also do knitting and crochet.
Yeah, I do a little bit of crochet.
Okay. But primarily knitting and cross stitch.
Yeah.
So how did you get into cross stitch?
So basically, when I was a kid, I used to watch my grandmother. My grandmother did needlepoint, and she used to do some great big huge pieces. I remember her doing like a pheasant that was like as big as some of my cross stitch pieces. And I always enjoyed watching her. And I also had an aunt that knit a lot. She knit a lot of things, and I was always fascinated watching her. And she always talked about how she wanted to teach her nieces, a couple of my cousins, how to knit, but they weren't really interested in it. And but she never considered teaching me because I was a boy, right?
Yeah.
So you know, that kind of piqued my interest. And my mom also started doing a little bit of cross stitch, but not anything. The stuff that she did didn't really interest me. And when I met my wife and we started dating, she started talking about how she did cross stitch. And you know, I'd had enough experience with it that I could, you know, watching other people doing it, that I could kind of carry on a conversation. And she eventually got out all of the patterns that she had, that she wanted to stitch, and showed me some stuff. And up until that time, I thought cross stitch there wasn't anything that really interested me, but she had some patterns that were great big huge pictures of things that really, really caught my interest. And I was like, I really want to do that. I want to stitch that piece. And so I asked her to teach me. And so she took me down to at the time, there was a Fred Meyer that had some cross stitch supplies, and we went down there, and I picked a book of some things that I thought that I'd like to stitch, and some material and some floss, and she taught me how to stitch, and it just kind of went from there. So I've been stitching ever since.
So you've always had an admiration from your family, but it wasn't until your wife that you really learned. Am I correct?
Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
Does she still stitch?
No, after she taught me, about a year or two later, she kind of lost interest. And so, you know, she still encourages me, but she doesn't really stitch herself anymore.
Okay. And then, did your aunt teach you how to knit?
No, I taught myself how to knit.
Okay. Okay. And was that later in life as well, or was that at a younger age?
No, that was later. That was about, let me think. It was around 2000 when knitting was really kind of getting to be really popular. And I just decided I wanted to learn, so I read a couple of books and taught myself how to knit.
Very nice. So then you obviously have that love of I like large projects too. We both like large projects, but it seems like you got that interest from your grandmother, because she was always stitching those large projects as well.
Yeah, I guess so.
Can you explain what it is about those large projects that you like so much versus maybe like the smaller?
I don't know. I think part of it is the challenge of stitching something large. I mean, if I'm gonna spend a lot of time doing something, I want to do something that's big and complicated, and something that just takes about a week to stitch. It just doesn't seem like it's worth the effort for me. I guess I don't know. It just large things. It just seems like I really want to spend my time on something that I really want to be proud of doing.
Okay. I know in one of your recent videos, you had mentioned that you started a smaller piece and then you kind of like put it down because you're like, I don't want to stitch this because it didn't interest you. So that's why I was curious as to, I kind of feel the same way. Like I like stitching small pieces occasionally, but I really like the large pieces because if I'm going to hang, I only have so much wall space. So if I'm going to hang stuff in my house or put stuff in my house, I want it to be something meaningful and big that I know I'm going to love for a long time because, and probably take me a while because,
yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know, just like throwing stuff, that's just me personally. I know a lot of people love doing small stuff and they like switch stuff out and everything, but I don't know, I don't like a whole lot of stuff laying around either, so.
Yeah.
But I've done the planets and stuff, and I really like doing those. Those also took a little bit more time but for me, doing a large piece, I like the detail in the piece. Like for me, I like having something extremely high detail, almost painting like.
Yeah, yeah. That's what really attracts me too. Is like painting like stuff, and I think that's part of it. If there's a lot of detail, that's going to require a lot more work and a lot more concentration. So, it's the same kind of thing. That detail is what makes it worth stitching.
Yeah, for us.
Yeah, sorry.
So, okay, so then, since you do such high detail, concentrative type work, when you stitch, do you sit down and solely focus on your stitching, or do you watch TV when you're stitching? Do you listen to podcasts? Like what is your stitching setup like?
So I have a hard time watching TV because I stitch on my kitchen table, and I'm not really facing the TV. And so it's kind of hard for me to really concentrate on the TV, but I do listen to podcasts. I listen to a lot of YouTube and pay attention if there's something that catches my eye. I also listen to audiobooks or podcasts as well. There are several podcasts that I'll listen to. So.
Okay. So I know you said you sit at the kitchen table before. So, and I know you have the Omnic. You have the Omnics, right? The Omnic.
Yeah.
Quantum.
I have the quantum frame.
So, do you just like set them up on the table, or do you have a frame? Or I've always tried to figure out how you do that.
So I have a stand that I've made out of PVC that I sit on top of the table, and I think I've shown it in one of my previous videos, but I can tilt it back and forth so that I can get the angle that I like, and so my piece sits on the frame, and then that gives me room underneath that I can put my hand underneath. I stitch two-handed.
Okay.
And I just do it that way.
Okay. And maybe you didn't, I just missed it, or because you've been on YouTube for 2 years now?
Yeah, I think it's 2 years this month. I haven't looked, but I think it's been 2 years.
Excellent. So then that's a great segue into why did you choose to make a YouTube channel, FlossTube channel?
So I don't know. I started watching FlossTube, and I actually watched FlossTube for at least a year, maybe 2 years, before I actually decided to actually make a video. And I was always tempted to do something because it looked like it would be really fun to share what I was doing and have people talk about what I was doing. I mean, there aren't a lot of people around here that know that I stitch, and there's even those who do aren't really interested in it. And I thought it would be fun to share what I was doing with people who were really interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me a couple of years to get over the fear of actually making a video, because, you know, I thought I won't be able to talk and I'll just look like a dork, you know. It's like, but it took me a couple of years to do that. And then finally one day I thought, well, I'll just record something, and if it looks okay, I'll upload it. And so I recorded something, and I didn't really like it. I mean, there were some it took me 3 or 4 times to actually get a video that I thought was good enough that I could upload. And so then I got to that point, and I thought, well, I'll just upload it and see what happens. And I was amazed at the response that I got just right out of the gate. I had a lot of people found me and really gave me some great comments, and that's just kind of how it all started.
So since your channel has come, or since you started your channel, have you noticed any difference in how you've stitched? Have you changed your, since watching FlossTube or starting your channel, have you changed your methods or your style of stitching as a result of your channel?
Well, you know, I've seen a lot of people stitch other things. There are some things that 5-6 years ago I would have never stitched, but actually seeing other people stitch them and actually seeing them on camera, that has really attracted me. So there are some pieces that I stitch now. I guess my tastes have changed a little bit, right? And so that has happened. The other thing that has happened is I feel more obligated to stitch now than I used to, because if I'm going to make a video, I have to have something that I'm going to show. So sometimes I feel like I'm stitching because I want to have something that I can share on my video.
Speaking of being obligated to stitch, you on each of your videos, probably maybe in the last year or so, you've started off with your videos as showing you have all these graphs,
right?
And your methodology of stitching and how you track your stitching, and which is awesome to see, because everyone has their own way of tracking their progress, or a lot of people keep journals or whatever, written down or whatever, and I don't do anything, I just stitch.
Right.
But and then you have all these like intricate, computer generated graphs that show your stitching and your days of stitching and how many stitches you put in and how many projects you have on the go. So can you talk a little bit about that and why you do that?
Well, it's just when I started stitching the way I stitch with parking and stitching a block at a time, I figured out that because of that, it would be easy for me to keep track of the number of stitches that I was stitching, because a block's 100 stitches and I could count the number of blocks that I stitched in a night. And so I just started doing that. And that was even before I made FlossTube videos. I was starting to keep track of that. And I started to realize that if I could also kind of predict when I finished something based on how fast I was stitching. And so I came up with this spreadsheet to be able to tell me how to do that. And it was just something that I kept in the background. And I guess on one of my videos, I thought, oh, I'll just show this. It might be fun. I was trying to come up with something to show that was not something different to show. And so I thought, I'll just show this and see what happens. So I showed a couple of graphs and a couple of things showing that how I kept track of stuff. And I was really surprised at how many people said, I really like that, and show me how to do that. And so because I got a response from a lot of people, I just kept showing those graphs. And it's kind of fun to see, because it kind of shows I mean, I really like the trend that I do, because it kind of shows how things go. And you know, my wife asked me about what I was doing like a couple of weeks ago. My wife asked me about why it was that this was this way in this graph, and I said, well, I can look. And I looked and I said, okay, this is what was happening in that time, and that's why there's a little bit of a dip there. And she was like, I said, you'll probably think I'm really strange that I can tell you that. And she said, well, it makes sense. So I think it's the engine. I'm an engineer by trade.
Mm-hmm.
That's my profession. And it's the engineer in me that drives me to do that kind of stuff, I think.
So then the other aspect of your stitching that goes along with that, keeping track, and you mentioned that, is you park, and you have a very methodical approach to how you stitch many of your large full coverage or very intricate detailed designs. As far as, or I'll let you go ahead and explain how you approach your large full coverage, or
Right. So I used to stitch kind of cross country. I used to like choose a color that I wanted to stitch, and I'd stitch as far as I could with that color. And then after I'd finish one strand, I'd choose another color to stitch. And that's the way my wife taught me how to do. And I did that for several years. But with when I started stitching some things that were really complicated, like my Teresa Winsler Stroke of Midnight, that's Cinderella.
Mm-hmm.
That piece is really complicated, and the confetti is just really horrendous in some places. And I started getting lost in the chart. Because I didn't mark my chart, so then I'd have to go hunting through to figure out what I'd already stitched and what I needed to stitch. And then I'd have to count to see how far I needed to go. And I'd spend like all night and only put in about 100 stitches. And it was just taking a long time to stitch. It was kind of demoralizing, because at the end of the night, I'd finish stitching and it didn't look like I'd done anything. You know, it was like, what have I done? So yeah. I found a couple of videos on YouTube that talked about parking. And there was also a couple of websites that talked about how to do it. And I thought, well, that looks really interesting, because instead of worrying about all the confetti in the entire chart, I can see the way the colors run. I can see everything in a 10 by 10 block. And so then I started stitching 10 by 10 blocks and parking. And it was a little bit difficult at first. I had a hard time dealing with parking colors in the wrong place and figuring out where I'd made mistakes and that kind of stuff. But eventually I got so I could do it. And then I was worried about I started to see if I stitched blocks stacked on top of each other, I started to see little lines in between the blocks. I think there's like some kind of a tension difference that causes that for me. So then I spent some time trying to figure out how to avoid putting those lines in, and that's eventually led me to stitching diagonally. So and that's the way I've stitched ever since. Is I stitch basically, instead of stitching a square, I stitch a parallelogram, and those are my 100 stitches. And since I've done that, my stitching goes a lot faster. I mean, I can cover a lot of area in the chart really fast, and I actually feel like I accomplish things now.
So then you also take it one step farther as you go in. I don't know. You always start the X in the same way and end the X in the same way. So if you can explain that a little bit.
So the other thing that I noticed is I'd have stitches that were uneven. Like I'd have one leg that was a little bit longer than the other, and that kind of bugged me. And I tried to figure out why it was eventually I decided I need to figure out why it is that I get these long legs. And I finally figured out that the problem and I actually learned this from one of the sites that talked about parking, is that it's hard to come up in a hole that has a whole bunch of threads in it already.
Mm-hmm.
So then I figured out how to, I stitched so that I'm always coming up in a hole that's really empty. Generally, I try to make it so that I only come up in a hole that has a strand in it, and then I go down in the holes that have 3 or 4 strands of floss in it already. And that tends to make things look a lot neater. It tends to neaten up the stitches. And I also think that making stitches the same way every time, it just makes everything look more uniform.
Sure. Okay, so then in cross stitch, you've already alluded to it by the fact that your aunt never even thought to teach you knitting or crochet whenever you were younger because you were a guy.
Right.
So, and you and I both have channels on FlossTuber, and I think we're maybe like we're 2% of the FlossTube community of being male stitchers versus female stitchers. So have you noticed I don't know, how have you felt being a male stitcher in this predominantly, or at least what appears to be a predominantly female culture?
Well, I find it really interesting. I think because I am male, because I am a man and I'm stitching, I think I get a lot more attention from people than if I were just, so I think that people tend to gravitate towards my channel just because I'm a man and I'm different. So, but I've also had people on Instagram that don't know about my channel who assume that I'm female, because I see every once in a while I see comments that are and that kind of makes me laugh a little bit because it's like, oh, so but I've always felt very welcomed by the community, just because I guess because I'm a little bit different.
I remember on one of your episodes you talked about going down to your local needlework shop and was it your first time ever in a needlework shop, or maybe it was that specific needlework shop, and your takeaway from that? And I know my first experience walking into a needlework shop and like how I felt just being a guy in the needlework shop. So
yeah, it kind of feels like that's a female space, right? And there are places that as a guy I feel very uncomfortable going to, because that's a space where only females go, right? Definitely. Only women go. And so going into a needlework shop, that felt like I was out of place, right? And I felt like there were a lot of people staring at me, and I don't know if they were necessarily, but there were people who knew who I was because of my channel, and they eventually came up to me and said, "So are you Brian? Are you?" And I yeah, and that kind of broke the ice a little bit.
Sure.
But yeah, and even now I do go to the Attic that's a well-known shop. I do go there every once in a while to get some stuff, but even now I don't really feel really comfortable going there. There are some people there who know me and they'll greet me by name, and that helps. But it just feels, I guess I'm a little bit old school when it comes to that kind of stuff.
No, I completely agree. And thankfully, my local needlework shop, I'm really good friends with the owner now. And she makes me feel comfortable right away when I come in. And usually I'm the only one in there at the time when I go in, because I always go in at off hours that aren't too busy anyways. Or 1 or 2 people in there at a time. But I know when I visited other shops that I've never been to before, I always feel out of place because you're either the only guy, or the other guys are only there because they have to be there because they're with their spouse. And it's like, you know, you do feel like there's people looking at you. So
Yeah. And it's probably not justified. I mean, the owner of the attic, she's talked about other men that stitch, you know, and she's told me like, men who stitch, they like to do great, big, huge, complicated projects. She said,
yeah,
you know, she said they don't like to do Bent Creek or Lizzie Kate. And I guess that, so, you know, she knows there are several men that she knows that stitches, but I've never run into them when I've been there.
sure. Well, because they're always doing the big projects and they only have to go in once every couple of years.
Yeah, that's right.
So, okay. So, I know we talked about your channel and what you've been doing on your channel. Where would you like to see your channel and your stitching go in the future?
You know, I don't know. I do feel like I've gotten into a bit of a rut with my channel, and I'm trying to come up with different things that I can do. I mostly just want to keep going. I have a whole bunch of full coverage pieces that I want to start, but I need to get to the point where I feel like I can start them.
Mm-hmm.
There's some pieces that I want to stitch that have lots of specialty stitches. I want to go on and kind of get more in this specialty stitch type thing rather than, you know, and I just want to just keep stitching, I guess.
Well, I know in another one of your recent videos, you talked about how you had a rotation and then you went away from the rotation and now you're back to the rotation. So I think I know for me, I'm not a rotation person, but it kind of like fell into a bit of like an unorthodox, unstructured rotation. So it's like, I think for me on my channel, it's a way of exploring and allowing myself to like, for my channel is a way to document my exploration in the craft.
Right.
And like, if I need to, I can go back and say, oh, what did I talk about? And like, why did I say I wanted to do this? And think I must have been crazy at the time because that never worked. So like, I know, but going back to you and about you thought about doing that. And so you had a rotation, then you went away from the rotation, then now you're back to the rotation.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about that a little bit. Why do you think you need to be back on a rotation?
So, you know, it's like, I like to work very systematically, obviously, because parking. And another reason why I like to do that is I found that if I have to decide what I'm going to do, I get tired of making decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't want to do anything. And it's the same with my rotation, is I like to decide ahead of time what I'm going to do and then just follow that. It makes it easier for me to switch from one project to another. And that's what I found was happening is I went off my rotation because I was kind of influenced by other people on FlossTuber saying, oh, I just want to stitch what I want whenever I want to. And I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. But then I find that after a while, I don't want to stitch anything. And I've still got all these projects that I need to do. And it's not that I don't want to stitch them. It's just that I have a hard time deciding that I want to start something again. So putting the rotation in place makes it so that I don't have to make those decisions and I can just stitch.
So then, and I know you were saying about how at the end of your rotation, then you would make a start. And I think you're similar to me in the fact that you don't like to have too many projects going at a time, especially large projects. Am I correct in that?
There's this tension, right? There's this tension is like, I don't want to have a lot of projects especially because if I have a rotation, if I get like 20 projects, then that means I only stitch on one project every 20 weeks. And that's like what, 5 months. So I don't like having a lot of projects, but then there's the other side of me that I have a whole bunch of stuff that's all ready to go that I don't want to have sitting waiting. And so there's this tension, and I'm always fighting it. Do I start another project and add something to my rotation, or do I, and I keep going back and forth between whether or not I want to start something or just try to get something finished.
And then, do you feel compelled by having a channel to start stuff, to show new things to people?
I never really thought about that, but yeah, I think there is a little bit of that. It's like, oh, I've got to have something new to show. I mean, I've showed this piece and like 10 times already, and so yeah, there may be a little bit of that.
I sometimes feel that, and I'm like, oh, maybe I should start something just so I have something different and new to show, because I stitch on the same things for years on end. So, but that's just a thought I just had. I'm like, But okay, so then wrapping up, as a male stitcher, and we know there's lots of males out there. I get lots of comments from guys that watch my channel or on Instagram that, I see that follow me and I follow them back, but have not jumped into YouTube yet. What kind of advice would you give to a young male or any kind of male, young or old, that hasn't done it yet, but that might be on that verge of jumping into YouTube, but hasn't because they're a male and they don't know how they're going to be received because of that stigma of being a male stitcher?
I'd say jump right on in. I mean, you will be well received because you are a male. I mean, I can't tell you how many women have commented and said, "Oh, I wish that my husband would stitch." There are a ton of, and if there are a lot of women that would be interested in seeing more male stitches. So I'd say jump right in. And, if you're a little bit nervous about starting, do what I did. Make a video with, you don't even have to decide that you're even going to upload it. Try making a video and see how it goes. Just take baby steps. And eventually, if you decide that you really want to upload it, go ahead and do it. It will be a great experience. It has been really fun for me to make my video and share these things with other people.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank Brian for coming onto the channel or onto the episode today. And you can again find him on his YouTube channel as Blitstitch, and I'll have it all linked below, as well as follow him on Instagram, Blitstitch. And hopefully, and he does post his videos usually on a monthly basis, like a monthly update.
Yeah, I try to do it once a month.
So go check him out, subscribe to him, follow him, and we'll see you back here next week or in a couple weeks for another awesome interview with another great FlossTuber. So thank you again, Brian.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. And don't forget to always be creative.
Be creative.
See you guys later.
See ya.
Awesome. I'm doing something.